That is about the, the trajectories of Dalit movement in Kerala and its political presence. I am actually conceptualized this lecture within the premise of a regional historiography, which needs an inclusive historiographical position or historiographical outlook. So, as far as the term Dalit is concerned, it is an inclusive category which had been developed as part of the historical process of the subcontinent of India. And the term Dalit has its contemporary meaning of political articulation in the context of a particular kind of political situations that we are also confronting or facing now. So the locating the way in which the term Dalit has been imagined in the deep south, that is in the Kerala, would be a very productive kind of interrogation which would necessarily create a kind of a historiographical travel in the case of the social modernization process in the colonial Kerala, and also the various trajectories the movement has already acquired as part of the political communication of the Dalit communities in Kerala at large. So as far as the prehistory of the Dalits in Kerala is concerned, we have a number of terms to denote the categories like the Adiyar or Al, or sometimes we have references in the medieval documents or medieval documents like the epigraphical materials and other kind of literary artifacts referring to the pre-modern term equivalent to that of the Dalits, that is the Adiyar or Al, that is the men at the feet. So what actually the process of meaning making in terms of its political articulation in the colonial period has been a particular kind of trajectory of the term Dalit as such, primarily because of the reason that it got a political kind of meaning in the context of the colonial modernization process, in which three kind of notions were developed within the larger process of Dalit articulation, largely the articulation of the Dalit Bahujan communities in Kerala. That one is a kind of notion that is the notion given by one of the iconic leader of that is Ayyankali. He was a very prominent Dalit leader or who led an organic protest in the context of the colonial modernity for having a kind of intervention in terms of anti-caste movement and direct breaking of caste. So he actually introduced the term that is the Sadhu Janam in Malayalam, that is the common people. The realm of common people was introduced in the Malayali common public during that time, which actually meant for a kind of an ethical and moral community which would encompass all kind of impoverished people in terms of caste and community or in terms of caste positions. So this was a notion which actually encompasses a kind of ethical and moral trajectory of defining Dalit themselves in the context of the colonial modernity, which produced a kind of a society having a kind of trajectory which would define the equality and justice in terms of education and other cultural and intellectual resources. So education became a kind of path-breaking capital for Ayyankali and his people. So he could try to acquire different forms of capital and resources which actually define the community articulation in the colonial context. And there were a number of struggles actually led by him in the larger Travancore, breaking the caste, directly attacking the caste and caste dispositions then existing the Malayali common public during that time. So another important person when the trajectory of the term Dalit had been articulated, that is another person that is Poigel Appachan or Poigel Kumara Guru or Poigel Kumara Gurudevan. And he could actually visualize the Dalit experience in historical past in terms of the slave experiences. So he actually engaged with the historical past in a different way. And the existing historiographical tradition in the colonial modernity for the state of Travancore or elsewhere, that was a kind of historiographical narrations, engulfed and emphasized the political history or historiography of the regional state. Breaking this kind of historiography, he wanted to cull out, or he wanted to recover the genealogical histories of the historical past of the slave experience and the people who had the experience of the slave past. So he wanted to recover the slave experience through memories, and large number of memorial kind of expressions were also intonated in his writing culture and his memory kind of the textual traditions. So he wanted to recover and rememorize the slave experience in the historical past in the context of the colonial modernity, and he could visualize a history of the Dalit past by way of emphasizing the need for the unity, and the unity would be created out of common identity of the Dalit historical past. That was the way in which he had been able to interrogate reflexively in the historical past of the time. So the genealogy of slavery for him was important. And the slave historical past was genealogically created, and the narrative intonations and narrative textual traditions were made, primarily in the form of recovering the oral tradition of the historical past. So that was a momentous rupture in the history of the Dalit communities in the midst of the colonial past. So the contestation was made in this particular context. Actually, Poigel was able to make two kind of ruptures and contestation. One was with the colonial, larger colonial situation in which Dalit communities were actually getting in touch with the colonial, avenues of education and other forms of material capital on the one hand. And we also find his interrogation with the missionary Christianity. And he engaged with in the earlier career, he was also the part of the missionary Christianity, and later he created a critical rupture from the missionary Christianity, and he himself, developed a sabha or a congregation for himself and for his people, and he, established a sabha for Dalit communities for a creative and liberatory theology, or liberatory theology, or liberatory theology for the Dalit communities as a whole. So the PRDS, that is the Pratyaksha Raksha Deva Sabha, was formed under the aegis of him and his people. That was a trajectory, especially in the spiritual realm of the Dalit historical past, and the imagination of the political then present of the time. Then we find another path-breaking, interventions made by the larger process of the social modernization and reform process was the intervention made by Narayana Guru. He was a person who actually defined the modern sensibilities in a different way by way of making a critical position of the caste and caste philosophy. And he was the person, the Guru was the person who formulated an anti-caste philosophy for anti-caste struggle and imagination for the larger, Malayali community on the basis of a social ethics and morality. So this moral ethical community, according to him, Kerala people was imagined in terms of a moral and ethical community, and he wanted to create notions and dictums of, the modern identity of Malayali as a one God, one religion and one caste. This is a notion which actually defined the modern Malayali common public in terms of an ethical and social morality, which was a guiding principle in the creation of the modernity as well as the social ethos of the social reform process in Kerala. That actually this was a kind of an imagination on the basis of the compassion and fraternity. Compassion and fraternity was two important edifices on which the modernity of Kerala was defined internally by Narayana Guru. And externally, the situation was quite different because of the reason that the colonial modernity was structurally transformed in accordance with the Travancore region in the larger process of the state as well as the colonially dictated political and economical transformations. And another trend was very important for imagination of the Dalit identity that was largely given by Sahodharan Ayyappan or Brother Ayyappan. Sahodharan Ayyappan was basically an atheist. He could formulate a critical position to engage the society of caste and community stratification, and he was the person who was able to formulate the notion of fraternity and compassion, and anti-caste disposition was very important for him, and he was able to develop a philosophical underpinnings in his everyday activity of anti-caste struggle in Kerala, which in fact defined the modern Kerala as a secular modern community of social imagination on par with the so-called secular ambitions. So the Sahodharyam or a fraternity was important for him, and he is a person who developed a Sahodharya Prasthanam, which largely contributed for the a making sense of a society for just unfair articulation, and to develop a society of an equal kind of social imagination and equality and social justice. So that I would like to turn to the next critical juncture of the Dalit movement in Kerala by incorporating the reform agendas and the reform activism from Ayyankali, Narayana Guru, Poigelappachan and Sahodharan Ayyappan. Then we find the emergence of the post-Ayyankali phase of Dalit articulation in Kerala, which witnessed the two important questions, that is the body of Dalits and also the self. And self and body of the Dalit began to be articulated in a Physipress kind of a tendency that was articulated in form of number of individual caste and community organization in the post-Ayyankali phases in Kerala. There were a number of, or there started organizing Dalit communities on the basis of individual caste like the Pulayas and Parayas. So which was in fact a kind of a departure from the notions actually laid down by early reformers. And the two important factors were contributed for this kind of Physipress kind of tendencies and individual caste organization in Kerala. One is the intervention made by the Gandhian politics in terms of the Harijan and anti-untouchability movements in the larger process of the Kerala's social reform movement and the nationalist politics. Actually, the nationalist politics under the Gandhian notions of anti-untouchability program and all this the rhetoric of the Harijan, the notion of Harijan was used in the form of anti-untouchability campaign. And there are a number of events and activities related to the anti-untouchability campaign and the temple entry movement, which actually in fact consolidated the communities in a new kind of imagination of identity, or a new kind of nomenclature was imposed upon the Dalit communities. That is, the Harijan was imposed upon the Dalit communities as elsewhere. And which was a kind of a turning point in defining the Dalit identity under the carpet of the so-called Hindu identity. So the pre-colonial times, the Dalits were not Hindus as such. They were individual caste group having the history and experience of a slave past, and they have been incorporated into the rhetorical culture of the nationalist politics and incorporated into community identity in terms with the Hindus as part of the anti-untouchability campaign or eradication of untouchability, and the temple movement, the culmination of the temple entry movement actually in fact largely Hinduized the various Dalit communities in Kerala. So a token politics was unleashed upon the Dalit communities in Kerala, as elsewhere in the subcontinent, which actually, made a critical, violent departure on the identity of the Dalits, which actually formulated Dalit as a community, within the framework of the so-called Hindu and Hindu nationalism in its political meaning. So next aspect is the temple entry movement, which in fact actually, created a ruptures and political kind of suppress tendencies in articulating or in understanding themselves as a category of social communication or articulation of their collective Dalit identity. Then we, by 1930s onwards, or 1930s and 40s and until the 50s, what we find the emergence of the radical left politics in Kerala, which was manifested in the form of the peasant movements or movements from the middle peasant and such groups. Actually, the radical politics of the communists or the left movement did not take into account the caste as a specific category, because they emphasized the first or primary category or primary question for them was land and the class position and class question. So under the class question, the Dalit issues or Dalit problems or the caste issues were put aside, and the Marxists largely they tried to incorporate the caste in terms of the primary producing groups, and also in terms of agriculture labor. So the notion of agriculture labor that was largely, encompassed in the Marxist narratives or left radical politics actually undermined the identity of Dalit as a community of historical past, having their self identity of wrecked lineages or a broken historical past. So what the Marxists did, they wanted to create the Dalit community and mass into the larger rhetorical politics of the Dalits as the agricultural laborers, which actually evaporated the, Dalit identity as such. So their notion was, for example, the EMS, the ideologue of the Marxist, communist parties, who formulated the idea about the Jadi, Janmi, Naduvaditham, Jadi, Janmi and Naduvaditham, or caste as a kind of social system. Then its economic base, a larger economic base was, or land ownership and control was modulated on the basis of the Janmi system, a particular kind of land ownership that exists in Kerala. Then the political apparatus was largely controlled by the lords, the political lords. So the Jadi, Janmi, Naduvaditham was a notion was introduced in Kerala by EMS, which actually encompass a larger kind of political imagination in which Dalit had not been visible as such, as a community as well as a people having a long historical past for themselves. Then we find the 1970s also witnessed their emergence of a new kind of visualization and autonomous Dalit movement in Kerala. And people like Kallara Sukumaran and also Paul Chirakarod, they are the two important persons who were associated with the 1970s, the emergence of the new autonomous Dalit movement. They problematized the community and identity in the context of the politics of 1970s, which created new political vocabularies and Dalit sensibilities in 1970s. And the community articulation and identity of the Dalit community began to became a category of political communication during that time, and which also transformed itself into a new kind of path-breaking kind of imagination in 1980s, which witnessed two types or two momentous kind of articulation in terms of what I call is an Ambedkarian turn in the Dalit politics in Kerala that witnessed in 1980s. Ambedkarian turn in the sense that during that time Ambedkar became more visible, more receptive and more accommodative in the Dalit public, quote unquote, in Kerala by way of translating fundamental or original writings of Ambedkar, including the Annihilation of Caste and other texts. So which actually facilitated a new kind of political imagination for the Kerala people, for the Kerala Dalits, which in turn, conversated with the early movements of Ayyankali and Poigelapachan, the clubbing together of the in the early movement and the 80s, Ambedkar's visibility created new kind of an atmosphere, a new kind of intellectual culture, a new kind of writing culture among the Dalit intellectuals and Dalit public activists. So that also witnessed in the form of a new turn or new writing culture for Dalit communities, especially what I call the literary turn in Dalit movement in Kerala. Literary turn in Dalit movement in Kerala, which incorporated the larger, Dalit writing culture or Dalit literature by way of incorporating the Dalit movement and the Black Panther movement, and also they tried to conversate with the black literature and Caribbean literature during that time. So as part of which we have a number of literary production and aesthetical communication during that time. So TKC Vadadala, who was an important literary figure among the Dalit communities, and C. Ayyappan was a very powerful writer, a short story writer, and Raghavan Atholi, C. Uttaman, and James, etc., and etc. So a lot of people we have in Kerala during the 1980s, which witnessed a robust intellectual culture and writing, ethos during that time. They actually collectively produced a new kind of, aesthetic production, a new kind of, literary imagination, which actually made possible for critiquing the existing Savarna upper caste literary imagination and writing culture. That created new kind of path-breaking or alternative kind of writing culture for the Dalit literature. So people like K.K. Baburaj and K.K. Koch, Sunny Kabikad, Salim Kumar, C.S. Murali, a lot of other peoples were also emerged as important public figures who intervened not only in the field of literary production but also in the public communication and Dalit writing culture. So the 1990s, what we have the two important transformation in the Dalit articulation and cultural and political engagement. That is from the part of the history writing and also the engagement in the culture of Kerala culture. So the history of Kerala, as a regional history of Kerala, began to be a critical theme for the Dalit groups. So people like the late T.H.P. Chandarashwari, Kundugudi S. Mani, they were actually the amateur historians and public activists and intellectuals who tried to reimagine the history of Kerala, especially the ancient and medieval Kerala, from a Dalit critical standpoint, and they could visualize a new kind of history writing, or somehow an alternative kind of history writing was made possible because of the intervention of T.H.P. Chandarashwari and others. And in the field of the professional history writing, and there were attempts from the part of the professional or academic historians, people like Sanal Mohan, who engaged in the field of modernity and colonial transformation. And he is the person who could visualize largely in the modernity and the slave experience, and also the imagination of equality in terms of the new social science or critical new social science, and flexibly articulated the Dalit historical past from a new Dalit subaltern point of view, or Dalit subaltern historiography, and which actually in fact created new kind of historical intervention or historiographical intervention, which actually critiqued, or they people like Sanal Mohan, who is able to critique the dominant historiography and its archival traditions, and the dominant historiography and its evidential paradigm. And also the Rankine or positivist historiography of the mainstream history has been radically challenged by Sanal Mohan, and he could alternatively posited a new critical social science paradigm through which he problematized the Dalit history from a different point of view. Similarly, what we find the writings of K.K. Koch, which is K.K. Koch is a very robust intellectual in Kerala, and he tried to write Kerala history from a Dalit perspective or Dalit history perspective, and he's a public intellectual and writer. He also tried to engage with the dominant historiographical paradigm of Kerala, especially the early and medieval Kerala history. And that also created a critical sensibility and an alternative understanding of history and culture from the part of the Dalit community. And also what we find another important transformation or the departure from the part of the Dalit intervention in Kerala was the question that was posed by the Dalit communities or Dalit intellectual at large against or on the dominant, what we call dominant developmental paradigm. The dominant developmental paradigm of the state or Kerala state was or began to be criticized by the Dalit communities and Adivasi communities because the so-called Kerala model development actually in fact ghettoized the lived experience of Dalit at a margin. And so there are attempts from the Dalit intellectuals, especially the intellectuals who are associated with the Dalit movements, who try to problematize the problems of Dalits in terms of their landlessness and also the ghettoization of Dalits in number of thousands of Dalit colonies. So the paradigm that they formulated was in fact critiquing the existing dominant understanding of the developmentalism of Kerala, which was used or which was narrated or which was visualized in the form of the so-called Kerala model of development. And the problem of the landless, as far as the problem of the land struggle and landless is concerned, there are a number of land struggle from the part of the Dalit communities. That is the struggle for land in the Changara and Muttanga and other places, which also actually turned a new standpoint or new turning points in the Dalit movement in Kerala. And another important movement was the Dalit feminist standpoint and Dalit women articulation. Taking into account the larger, Dalit women speak differently or the Brahmanical patriarchy in this continent. In Kerala too, we have the intervention from the part of the Dalit women intellectuals, people like Lively, Stephen and Rekha Raj, who developed a paradigm shift in the case of the Dalit women experience, who spoke differently in terms of their historical experience and contemporary locations. So then we find the intervention from the part of the Dalit communities, both intellectually and political communication, on the question of the public violence and Dalit bodies. And recently we have a number of issues related to the killings and committing suicide from the part of the Dalit communities, especially for example the case of the Jisha. She was a law student who raped and killed. And we have Kelvin recently, Kelvin was committed suicide or somehow he was killed primarily because of the caste issues. So caste violence and atrocities became an important theme of Dalit engagement with the public communication and their political activism. And also we have the notions of Hindutva and Hindutvaization of Dalit communities in Kerala. That is a very important pertinent question nowadays because a strategic kind of campaign is going on in Kerala to so-called Hindutvaization of Dalit communities by making a slogan which anchored on anti-Muslim feelings and taking into two narrative practices, one about the notions and narratives on Tipu and another is the notions and narratives of the 1921 revolts about the Muslim communities or Malabar rebellion. Both Tipu's narrations and Malabar, narrations of the Malabar rebellion were actually taking or are being, taken into account to create a kind of rhetoric in which the Muslim community became the other, and this other is used to, Hindutvaization of Dalit communities too. So what we needed or what we need today is to make a unity and solidarity among the Dalit and communities like Muslims and other marginalized community in the all sort of the Hindutva politics. So I hope there are attempts to a solid kind of, solid kind of attempts are being made among the Dalit and Muslim communities to challenge the Hindutva politics in Kerala too. So in which Dalit historiography can contribute much. Thank you very much.